Okay, thanks for coming. Good afternoon. I mean, today we have a great event. Lorenzo Cordova is going to talk to us about Mexico's democratic transition and the authoritarian regression. Lorenzo is now a fellow here at the Georgetown Americas Institute. He's a Mexican constitutional scholar and public intellectual who specializes in electoral law, constitutional theory, and democratic governance. He has a law degree from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and a PhD from the University of Turin. I mean, he has all the levels of researchers that in Mexico you need to have to be considered a serious scholar. But he was also, I mean, a member of the Electoral Council of the National Electoral Institute, that it changed names a couple of times while he was there. So first he was a member of that board, and then he became the president of the National Electoral Institute from 2014 to 2023. So he stepped down a couple of years ago. He's also a very prolific author. He has written, co-written, or coordinated more than a dozen books, and his most recent work is called La Democracia Constitucional en Riesgo, Los Autoritarios No Descansan. So he also has a weekly video column at Latinus, a column at El Universal, and he's a frequent contributor to specialized journals and broadcast media, and he's going to stay around Georgetown for 2026. So with that, I mean, thanks, Lorenzo, for doing this.
Thank you so much. Okay. Well, once again, thank you so much, Alejandro, for your kind presentation. It's an honor to me being right now a fellow at the Americas Institute here at Georgetown University, and make this my first show as academic and as scholar here in Georgetown today with you. I would like to start asking you for you to forgive my still rusted and quite rough English. The Mexican situation is not equivalent to my rough English. I intend to improve it. The Mexican situation hopefully will improve, but I have a lot of concerns that I would like to share with you today. Well, I build this presentation that, of course, is up to you if you want it. And I would like to start with a premise. Currently, right now in Mexico, we are living an authentic change of regime. In political theory, change of regime is assumed like the transition or the shift between one kind of political regime into another, and I think that is precisely what is going on in Mexico in the current times. That concerns many of us because we are shifting out from a constitutional regime, a constitutional democracy that takes us a lot of effort to achieve, a lot of time, and it's quite impressive how fast is this regime change occurring right now. Why I assume that we're in front of a former change of regime? Well, a constitutional democracy stands on 5 main principles: the existence of rule of law, the separation of powers principle, the recognition and protection of human rights, free and fair elections, and a democratic representation. Well, right now, this is not something that has been present along our history commonly. On the contrary, in Mexico's history, democracy has been a very strange and quite a not often period, despite our constitution since the first one after the independence, established that Mexico is a democratic constitution. All those principles have been present in our constitutions since the first one in 1824. But what happens in reality is that despite, this formality, democratic, constitutional democracy was not oftenly happens in reality in Mexico. So we can, along our history, we can see a divorce between what we can call, the legal country and the real country. If you read all the constitutions establish, settle that constitutional democracy, but in fact, constitutional democracy was a very ephemeral reality. It happens probably in the 19th century, along 7 years after the restoration of the Republic, when Juarez defeated the Maximiliano Empire. It happens once again some months before the revolution, after with the government of Francisco Madero. And once again, it was present, but in the last 30 years after what we call the Mexican transition into democracy. But that's important to take in count, because along Mexico's political history, authoritarianism has been the rule, and democracy, or constitutional democracy, has been an exception period. Why I sustain we are living right now a change of regime? Why I sustain democracy, constitutional democracy right now in Mexico is at risk? Well, if you see right now, all these 5 pillars of the constitutional democracy are in risk, or have been eroded with political decisions, constitutional changes that has happened in Mexico in the last 4 or 5 years, no more. The rule of law right now is living a very complicated moment. We just have a judiciary reform that makes Mexico the only country around the world in which the whole judges are elected by popular votation. The separation of powers is, and there is a very large, discredit of the law. No, the idea, the phrase that López Obrador constantly pronounced as a president: "No me vengan con que la ley es la ley." No. It's a good example of how of this lack of the rule of law in Mexico. The separation of powers is still a principle in the Constitution, but politically we came back to the times in which there was an absolute synchrony between government, legislative, and also judiciary. So the idea or the logic of the division of powers, the separation of powers, that the power control the power, has been weakened in Mexico. We are living a human rights crisis. This is not new, but the improvements we have achieved in the last 2 or 3 decades in this issue right now are in crisis. I mean, Mexico has become one of the countries, unfortunately, that do not accept or do not accomplish the sentences of the Inter-American Human Rights Court. Free elections, there is a discussion right now in Mexico about if our electoral system is still a democratic or still has democratic integrity conditions. Many people claims that the electoral bodies has been political captured already. And right now, we have, in terms of representation, we have a huge discussion about if it's constitutional or not, the qualified majority that since the last elections, the ruling party has already achieved. Because, the constitutional assessment in terms of overrepresentation has not been accomplished with the current integration of the Congress. So to understand how grave is, how dangerous is this change of regime, I assume we have to, at least in a summarized way, to rebuild the history of our transition in order to understand how deep and dangerous are in terms of the democratic, constitutional democracy backsliding occurring right now. And for that, it's inevitable to, in a summary way, to reconstruct, to rebuild how was this very particular regime that has been settled in the 20th century, that Vargas Llosa named it as a dictadura perfecta, no, the perfect dictatorship, as a premise to understand which one were the axles of the democratic transition. Essentially, the Mexican regime built after the revolution was a constitutionally wanted a concentration of power regime in the figure of the presidency of the republic. We are a presidential republic, yes, that's it. But despite other examples, such as the US, the constitutional framework sets huge powers around the presidency, and the whole constitutional arrangement makes the presidency, you know, the axle of all the regimes functioning, political regime functioning. Which one were the characteristics of the Mexican authoritarian regime in the 20th century? First one, the elections were run by the government. This usually happens in many countries, but in Mexico, that supposes that the government could organize, the government slash the ruling party becomes, you know, judge and player at the same time. Electoral frauds were quite often, no? Even in the 80s, and became popular and astonishing an expression, no? The patriotic fraud as a way to run elections, no? The second characteristic is that there was built, you know, a very strong official party, the PRI, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, which was thinked and built as in following, you know, the fascist model of the party, no, as not just as a political organization, but also a social political control medium. The president was the natural born leader of this party, and this party becomes, you know, an instrument in order to achieve the president's will. The PRI, the PRI, was the only political party that could present effectiveness candidacies to occupy representation offices, and that the party was the mechanism through which the government has absolute control on the congresses, eliminating the idea that the congresses are a sort kind of political control of the governments. On the other hand, the Supreme Court Justice was the head of the entire judicial branch. I mean, the judges were not independent. They depend on the not just on the criteria, but also administratively from the Supreme Court. And the justices were appointed by the president and ratified, yes, by the Senate, but the Senate has until 1988 only legislators. So there was a political control on of the judicial branch, and therefore there was not a judicial control of the government. And finally, the regime has a very strict control on the mass media, both through censorship in the case of newspapers, as well as the blaming of the concessions through the concessions with the radio and TV mass media instances. What were the consequences? Which one were the consequences of this regime? Well, it works quite well for a half century, but at a certain point, the fact that that was a system exclusionary, closed, and vertical, and resilient to pluralism provoked that in the 60s and the 70s, the institutional way that was already built was not enough capable to process, the political changes that in those decades were happening. Specifically, expressions such as, the student movement in 1968, or the guerrilla expressions that emerged in the late 60s and early 70s were brutally repressed, as any authoritarian regime usually does. The breaking point probably was the fact that in 1976 elections, the presidential elections, there was only one candidate, the one presented by the ruling PRI. Talking about political parties, there were only 4 parties. The political party system were absolutely closed, repellent to new expressions, and there were only 4 parties. I mean, the PRI, the ruling party, 2 parties that at the end of the day works as a satellite of the ruling party, and only one opposition party, the PAN, center-right political expression, and no one of those parties was a leftist party. So that provoked that transition, a democratization process was necessary. There is I will skip this slide, but I will leave it to you. I mean, Jesus Reyes Heroles, the Ministry of Gobernación, of the Interior at the time, explained what that reform, the so-called political reform in 1977, were intended to do. I mean, open the system in order to allow the plurality, the political plurality could play inside the institutional framework, and therefore to pacify the political life. But I would like to say that the Mexican transition was a very unique transition. It's very different from the other models of the democratic transition, such as the Portuguese, the Spain, the Greek one, of the Spanish or the Chilean way, because unlike these transitions, Mexican one occurs in a very long and gradual and a progressive way. It took so long to achieve the transition into democracy, despite what happens, in these other examples in which there is a breaking point. In Mexico, you cannot find a foundation point of the transition because it is a very long and gradual process. Despite of that, however, Mexican transition was profound and deep, and it transformed radically, the political system and installed an effective constitutional democracy. The axis of the transition, the main axis of the transitions, were essentially 4, and this is important to understand how deep is the change, the political change that is occurring right now in Mexico. The pillars, the so-called, what I call pillars of the democratization process, are first the recognition of political pluralism, the opening of the institutional framework in order to allow, this plurality of political positions can run into the legal and institutional framework, and allow that this plurality could be reflected in the decision-making institution, essentially, both the federal and local congresses. So pluralism and its reflection on the representative institutions. The second pillar was to reinvent the electoral system. During all the authoritarian period, elections were systematically and periodically run it on. But we couldn't say that those were democratic elections for many reasons, because not all the political expressions were represented, could run for public posts. There were not clarity about the rules, and the only certainty were who will win the elections. I mean, there were no certainty on rules. The only certainty was who will win the elections. No? There were predefined winners, which were the candidates, obviously, of the ruling party. So in order to democratize the country, was necessary to reinvent the electoral system. And a new electoral system was built, meaning new institutions, new electoral institutions, new rules, and new procedures in order to clarify the results, to guarantee certainty on the procedures, and obviously on the counting of the votes. The third act of the democratization progress was to transform the judiciary branch into a really autonomous one, and transform it in an authentic counterbalance of political powers. That supposes turn the Supreme Court into an authentical constitutional tribunal. That supposes a profound reform on human rights in order to get an actualization between the internal assumption of the human rights and the international human rights systems, and also the renewal and the modernization of the so-called juicio de amparo, which is a juridical procedure in order to protect, human rights against any abuse of power. And the fourth act was the creation of this is a very Mexican figure. It's not exclusive of the Mexican constitutional system, but it's a very peculiar, and it's take the inspiration of the so-called autonomous agencies in the American constitutionalism. The idea was to set some institutions that do not depend from the government, are autonomous from the government, are autonomous from the rest of the powers, which perform certain functions that originally were in the hands of the government, now of the executive branch, in order to be executed with technical criteria and not political criteria. The fact is that all these, the so-called organismos constitucionales autónomos, became a counterbalance institution for the exercise of the power. The idea was clear: to take out some powers from the hyper-presidency we built in the 20th century in order to, equalize the exercise of the power and allow that the logic of power separation, the power control the power, could be real in our country. The consequences of the building of these pillars were diverse. I will resume all these consequences in the fact that Mexico became finally a constitutional democracy with many of the characteristics of a democratic regime became natural in Mexican regime, such as alternance in the government, such as divided governments. The government who has no majority in the Congress, or the lack of predefined majorities in the parliaments. So, and of course, that the judiciary became a juridical counterweight of the government, both in the federal and the local level. Democratization in Mexico didn't solve many social issues. And those are, the lacks and the not solved problems with the democratization process. Essentially, the claim of social justice, which still stands today as, an accomplished promise, in the last century. The revolution, Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century was, made in order to solve the social inequalities. Social inequalities are still a problem right now, and unfortunately, the public policies instrumented by democratically elected governments couldn't solve these ancestral problems, such as poverty, inequality, violence, and so on. And this is the context in which, despite the achievements in terms of building a democratic, constitutional democracy, were or allowed the rising of a populist government, such as the López Obrador and the current government of President Sheinbaum are. The idea that provoked a swing back of the pendulum, of the political pendulum in Mexico. There are many ways to explain how this regression process is going on, but probably the more plastic idea can be shown through what the President López Obrador called the Plan C. After 2 attempts of electoral reforms that failed, President López Obrador launched 2 years ago the so-called Plan C. The Plan C was a huge amount of constitutional and legal reforms, going from, put into the Constitution the animals' rights, forbidding vaping, and so on. But in terms of the redrawing of the political structure, there are 3 main reforms, 4 if you want, that implies a radical change and an erosion of those 4 pillars in which the political transition into democracy stood up. An electoral reform, a reform of the judicial branch, the complete militarization of the public security, and finally this the elimination of a bunch, a large part of the so-called autonomous institutions or organismos constitucionales autónomos. If we had 4 pillars that stand the democratization process, the Plan C implies, as I said, the erosion or the blowing up of those pillars. In fact, with the judicial reform, the election of all the judges and justices in the country, which right now we can say it implies the politicization of the justice functions, the political capture of the judicial branch on one hand, the elimination in the so-called reform for administrative simplification, disappear many of the autonomous bodies that serves as a counterbalance of power. Obviously, not all of them disappear. The one that has already been colonized or controlled by the government are still there, but all the autonomous bodies that become, uncomfortable for the government and convenient for the government disappear. The National Guard was incorporated formally into the Ministry of Defense. So there's a total militarization of the public security in Mexico. The last last two pillars, the one of the representation of the pluralism and the electoral pillar, the electoral system that still guarantee free and fair elections, are in suspense. Are in suspense, but they're already targeted, because right now we have an electoral reform in course that intends to reset the political representation on one hand and redraw the electoral system. And once again, this is happening in a very complex context of precarious social conditions, a profound weakness of the opposition parties, an environment very prone to, the charismatic and populist discourse, and in a society which has been, it's not the only one in the world, deeply polarized and, fed with intolerance discourse in political terms. Right now, we are facing, as I said, an attempt of electoral reform, which in many ways is the final assault to the framework of the constitutional democracy in Mexico. To understand what is going on right now in Mexico, once again, it's important to understand how the electoral system was rebuilt, redesigned, in order to guarantee free and fair elections. Also here, there were four main axes in this electoral system transformation. The first one is to establish autonomous, independent, and professional electoral authorities. Autonomous from the government, independent from the political parties, and professional in their structure and establishing a civil service. The second act was the introduction of several mechanisms and procedures that guarantee that the people's will be respected in elections. A lot of technical issues that were set up in order to inoculate distrust. This is very important to understand. I mean, the electoral system is very complex and baroque because it was created in order to eliminate distrust. I mean, despite what happens in many other countries in which elections are based on a trust basis, stands on a trust basis, in Mexico, the whole electoral system is built assuming the people distrust elections, distrust results, distrust political parties, distrust everything. So the electoral framework is built in order to build that trust. It's very complex. It's a very baroque way to organize elections, but it worked in our history in order to introduce, trustability on electoral results. The third act were create equity conditions on the electoral competition. These conditions were achieved through three main issues. A very generous public financiation for the political parties' competition, the access to the so-called state media. This is what in several countries in Latin America call the franja. There are public times that are put on disposal to the political parties so they can freely present their programs, the political programs to the people. And third, a series of constitutional prohibitions in order to avoid, the intrusion or the using of public funds, intrusion of public servants, or the using of public funds to finance politics. And the fourth act was precisely, to build an electoral system that allows that the plurality of the political scenario could be reflected on the representative institution, specifically the chambers of the Congress. Well, both Plan A, Plan B and Plan C of electoral reform intended to undermine this main axis. I want the Plan A and the Plan B failed in their attempt. The Plan A because it was a constitutional amendment. They didn't achieve the number of votes necessary to go on. The Plan B was a legal reform. They had the numbers, so they achieved this plan, but the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional for severe violations to the legislative process. And the Plan C were never get on board. All the rest of the program of the Plan C that I mentioned before was accomplished, except the electoral reform, which is the only pending proposal in the Plan C. Well, Plan C is right now reproposed by the President Sheinbaum. Last week, she just presented his attempt, his bill of constitutional amendments. The idea is reducing the cost of elections, reducing the cost of the Electoral Commission, the National Electoral Institute, the INE, reducing the cost of the parties' financiation, eliminate or at least radically transform the proportional representation that allows right now that the minorities can be represented in the Congress, and propose a new, very complicated way. If you read the constitutional amendment proposal, it's very hard to everyone to understand what she's pretending. I mean, I don't know if it's just a problem of redaction, of how as a legislative redaction, or it's intentionally obscure. So everything will solve with the legal framework, not in the Constitution, but in the secondary legislation. The problem here is that they have the numbers to make whatever they want in the legislation. And right now, well, the point is, if the allies of the government in the governmental coalition will approve or not this amendment. Everything seems that they didn't build a consensus proposals, so it's very probable that their allies will not accompany this proposal. So we will probably fail again. But what is for me very important to put on the table is the fact the attempt of finishing the work of dismantling, the 4 pillars in which the democratic transition was achieved. So, in conclusion, right now we are living a very uncertain moment. I mean, there is no clarity if the electoral reform, which will be the last task in order to dismantling the constitutional democracy we built in the last 30 years, could be achieved. But anyway, as I said, it's very likely that the constitutional amendment that has been presented by President Sheinbaum will fail. They already are talking about a Plan B, so not a constitutional amendment, but a legal transformation. They have the numbers to do that. That would be as dangerous as a constitutional amendment, because they can, erode all the electoral system with legal transformations. The Plan B was not a constitutional amendment; was a legal modification, a legal reform, and it was as dangerous as the Plan A, despite it was not a constitutional amendment. So a mess could be done with the legal transformation. Third conclusion, those legal changes, as I said, could affect seriously the integrity of the electoral system. They can dismantle, for instance, the professional structure of the INE. Plan B, at the moment, established that there will be a reduction of the civil service, in a civil service, a dramatic reduction of 85% of all the officers. With that kind of reduction in a, I mean, after 9 years of running elections in Mexico, I can say it clearly, INE will not be able to run elections anymore. It's very complex to organize elections in a country like Mexico. There are many places in which the only public institution that can enter, I mean physically enter, specifically zones controlled by organized crime, are INE officers, not even public service, security service forces, no? Security forces. And that's because INE is a permanent institution. I mean, INE has, offices all around the country that works permanently, so they can understand in the day-to-day work how things are changing in the country, both in terms of social problems, political problems, or even the presence of organized gangs, organized crime gangs. And that is fundamental in order to get information for organize effectively an election. If they cut out this permanent structure, and they can do it with a legal reform, there will be a huge problem in terms of electoral integrity in our country. Well, another conclusion I would like to set that despite Morena right now, the ruling party is a very strong party, despite we have a very weak opposition parties, Morena is not an unbeatable party. They act as if they were. They assume themselves as a hegemonical party, but Morena is far away for what PRI at the time became. Many people says in Mexico that the intention of López Obrador and right now Claudia Sheinbaum, his successor, is back to to a past, an authoritarian past. For instance, the government of López Mateos and Echeverría, Alejandro, they are frequently, presented as the past they want to turn back. I don't think it's just a turning back to an authoritarian past, because it's not, maybe yes, in terms of the authoritarian aspirations. But the PRI's government in the past were settled in a very strong institutional framework. PRI, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, even in the name, has, this bet for building strong institutions. Maybe in an authoritarian code, but strong institutions. Instead of that, Morena is a movement with a very strong anti-institutional logic, anti-institutionally logic. They don't like institutions. They, blown up a lot of institutions, but they didn't build new institutions. And I think Morena, despite what PRI was, it's a very strong caudillista movement, caudillo movement. So PRI, the former PRI, was built in order to overcome the Mexico of caudillos that results from revolution. The institutionalization of the politics was the way to leave the caudillos Mexico behind. And I think right now, the caudillos component is very important in what Morena is and how Morena acts. So I don't know if it's just a turning back into authoritarian times. It could be much more worse, not because, the authoritarian logic, but the caudillo one. The institutional logic that aims, the changes. However, Morena, yes, is a ruling party. Yes, is the most voted party. It will probably continue to be that, and in the next elections. However, I mean, if we look at the results of the 2024 elections, which is the largest winning election for Morena, they received 55% of the votes. And there was a 40 to 44% of the voters that didn't vote Morena, and very probably won't vote Morena no matter what happens. So this is far away to be a hegemonical party as PRI was at the time. 2027 midterm elections will be decisive in order to understand which route the country will follow. On one hand, if there is a popular ratification of the sense and the logic of the deep changes Morena has been introducing. On the other hand, if there will be a realignment of power, a penalty votation or a cost after the warranty government exercise. That is why it's very important for Morena to achieve the electoral reform attempt they are presenting, changing the rules in order maybe to win, with favorable rules to them, what a defeat could suppose on elections. Will this proposal fail? I don't know. I mean, if we look what happened with plans A, B, and C, it won't be easy to them to achieve this reform. Could they present and get a legal reform, not a constitutional one? It is possible, but it's nothing written. In the past, for instance, the plan A was rejected in many ways because of the social movements, the social protest that arose against that proposal. And I will conclude just saying that the final destiny of our battered the constitutional democracy is on the people's hands. I mean, as far as we maintain the capabilities of changing our governments or our political destiny through free and fair votations, I mean, anything can happen. That's why it's very important, to resist and to maintain the conditions for free and fair elections that right now, with the electoral reform proposal, are at risk. So I will stop here, and I will thank you so much, and I will open to Q&As.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Let's turn to the questions from the audience. So let's pick 3 questions in the interest of time, and then you answer to everybody. My question would be, at least moving from a constitutional reform to a legal reform, what are the things that will be off the table and that the government will not be able to change through the plan B? And let's, whoever wants to ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll give you the mic.
Ladies first, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. I have 2 questions, but I'm going to just ask one. If there is time, I'm going to ask the other one. The first one is, I want to understand what is your interpretation of the motives of the president for this electoral reform, because for me it's not clear. Morena, as you said, is not the PRI, it's not institutionalized, it's a movement. There are regional powers within, there are also groups of power in the Congress, and it's like the same with the judicial reform. The president is losing some power because with the acordeones, she has to like face the others. Like she has some people who she wants to get into the judicial election, also in this case, but she's going to go against those from other members of Morena. So it's not going back to a presidentialism. I think she's losing power. So why would she be willing to accept or to send this electoral reform?
Yeah, thank you and congratulations. Very illustrative presentation. I also have three questions. I'm going to ask one and probably comment quickly on the second one, just in case you have some time. The first one is the role of a state government in the electoral process in the case of Mexico. Here in the States, we have a clear mandate to state governments to run elections. And if there is, since in Mexico we have a federal system, if there is, it will be good to see if there is any saying in the state government. The other ones is we have elections in Brazil coming up in October. We have elections in Colombia also as we are speaking. These are the three probably biggest democracies that we have in Latin America. If you see any similarities and differences. And the last comment have to do, since the autonomous constitutional bodies that were described didn't, if you think that part of what is happening has to do with the fact that income inequalities have remained so high, I'm wondering if you see a correlation between these autonomous bodies that were created in the 90s after President Carlos Salinas, 94, let's say, up until now. Income inequalities in the region remain extremely high. Something has to be done differently. If you can provide some thoughts about what can be done differently. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. That was a great presentation. I'd like to turn a little bit to current events and the recent CJNG operations. And I'm interested in the rule of law. From the US perspective, there are two opinions that have been tossed around recently arguing for and against US intervention in the CJNG operations. On the one hand, they claim that the Mexican government in the past has been relatively ineffective at countering the cartels. On the other hand, they argue that US interventionism could delegitimize the Mexican government, which will lead to like consequences that no one wants to deal with. So I'm wondering from the Mexican perspective, what's your opinion on possible US intervention, and how could you foresee US intervention affecting the rule of law and the legitimacy of the Mexican government in the future?
Okay, can we take a couple?
Only asking.
That's okay.
From the people on the left. So. On the right. And if the third would be on the right. So, the right or left is a matter of perspective, right?
Okay. Sorry for everyone. I will do this question in Spanish, so I hope everybody understand. Me presento, mi nombre es Luis Ramírez, soy estudiante de Relaciones Internacionales en la Universidad Autónoma de Baja California. Solo quería aclarar unos puntos, o sobre todo a lo mejor no entendí bien, ¿verdad? Algunos puntos. En los puntos finales que mencionaba sobre que Morena, pues en realidad el partido busca, bueno, carece de la fortaleza institucional que tenía el PRI, ¿no? Pese a que el PRI pues era marcado por un régimen autoritario, ¿no? Y ya recordemos el pasado, sobre todo con las represiones, ¿no? Que hubo con los estudiantes. Y nomás querías, si podía explicar más sobre Caudillo Movement, right? O sea, mencionaba más sobre eso, como explicarme más qué quiere decir solamente que Morena no solamente no le gustan las instituciones, no solamente busca un régimen autoritario, sino explicar más esa parte. Y yo que sería en sí el punto más importante, entender esa parte del el actuar y qué es lo que busca Morena. Gracias.
You had a question? You had a question. I did have a question, but I wasn't the person.
Okay. So you didn't have a question? We have plenty. Do you want to?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for your time. My name is Gabriel. I'm a graduate student in the Masters of Science and Foreign Service and the Masters in Public Policy. So I know a lot of the discourse just in the region as a whole has been about other countries potentially following a Bukele model, but do you see Morena being another model that other countries may be falling into or might start turning to as, I suppose, an alternative when it comes to pushes for autocracy? And I guess as a whole, what do you feel are the wider implications for the region if this trend continues in Mexico?
Thank you. Y gracias, doctor, por el tiempo. My question is, how do you envision the role of the opposition in the coming 2027 election? Because it seems to me that there's a big gap between the people that voted for Morena and are currently desencantados with Morena. But on the other hand, the opposition has gathered all these profiles that remind them of income inequality that was mentioned, of corruption, of impunity. So what do you think that the opposition parties, many of which are being created as we speak, like a lot, and even local parties, what should they do for 2027 in order to ensure that at least some victories in states, in key states or in key legislatures? That would be just a quick comment on that. Thank you.
So Lorenzo, you have all the questions. You have 7 minutes and we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Well, what could be the difference between, I mean, what can they change with the constitutional reform or a legal reform? I mean, obviously, if with the constitutional change, they can change everything. I mean, and the difference is what will not be achieved with a legal reform. I mean, the political financiation, the access to the media, to mass media, and the current integration of the Congress could not be touched. But the danger could be high anyway, because they can, I mean, redraw, the framework on which INE, the electoral body works. They can affect practically all the procedures and the mechanisms that have been improved in order to get transparent and trustable elections. They can, I mean, they could be a mess. I mean, anyway, they can, yes, not changing the main structure, but all the conditions, the conditions that allowed, the operation of the countries, of the elections in the country. The president is losing. Yeah. Yeah, by the Constitution. So the integration of the Congress, of both chambers, will not be touched. But, it's must an operational, for instance, they can translate the keeping and actualization of the electoral list to the government. I mean, they could be, I mean, all the integrity conditions, democratic integrity conditions of elections could be affected with a legal reform. And also the autonomy and independence of the electoral bodies, no? For instance, is the president losing power? I don't know. I mean, I think the president Sheinbaum has to deal with a lot of power centers inside Morena, and instead of what happened with the PRI, that was a very sophisticated institutional machinery to to process all the differences, because they were differences, in order to, at the end, be functional to the president mandates, directions. President Sheinbaum has to deal with the complexity of a movement like Morena without an institutional framework that helps her to with the decision-making process. So I think she's dealing with a lot of internal, powers that are disputing their predominance inside the political party, and that's not easy. That's why I think she's insisting on electoral reform. Actually, I mean, it was very funny because a couple of weeks ago, the leader of the legislative branch of the Partido del Trabajo has just said, I mean, those are his words. No, we already have the presidency. We have the control, the absolute control of the legislative. We have also right now, thanks to the judicial reform, the absolute political control of the judiciary. Why do we want an electoral reform? It's not necessary, no? And it's very interesting to see what is going on inside, the ruling coalition, because the Morena's allies, both Green Party and Labour Party, they do not want be affected with the changes that the constitutional reform supposes. So why insist on electoral reform? Well, there are two hypotheses. The first one is that they want to assure that no matter what's happened in terms of a public trust or public support, they want to warranty themselves a victory on 2027 elections. I mean, win with the rules what they eventually can lose, in terms of votation. The other thesis is just, to accomplish the work of dismantling, and the constitutional democracy framework we built in the transition. I mean, it's something more ideological, but you must understand Claudia Sheinbaum is a very ideological people. I mean, even more than López Obrador. And she believes absolutely that she's responsible for the second floor of the so-called transformation. I mean, that's what explains why Claudia Sheinbaum was appointed as the successor of López Obrador, because she was the one among the candidates, the internal candidates, Morena's candidates, the one who warranty in the best way the continuity of the project. And I think it's hard to understand if you look at it in terms of real politics. I think it's something illogical. I mean, to say we demolish the whole pillars of that, according to them, great farce that was the transition into democracy. And to rebuild the new world in Morena's terms, I think those are the two theses. I'm more inclined in this second one, because at the end of the day, as I say, they will create a problem where there's no problem. Right now, elections are not a problem in Mexico. It's a problem. They were a problem. They were the main problem 40 years ago. Right now, the elections, I mean, yes, you can have dispute about the results, and that's natural if you don't like them. But I mean, there is no dispute or a controversy on the rules and why to create it. I mean, they will even, and that is a crazy thing, they can even create a legitimacy problem for their victories in the midterm elections, 2027 elections, because, this unilateral modification of the rules and not agreement change of the rules. There are a lot of questions. I will go much more faster. Is this an example? I mean, well, let me answer you with an anecdote. Many of the electoral bodies that came, Latin American electoral officers that came to observe last year judicial elections in Mexico, many of them former colleagues of me. I mean, I get in touch and I maintain communication with them, told me that they were very interested in come to Mexico to see how a judicial election is run and how is going on. Because the Mexican example for many of these Latin American countries results very interesting. And I said, be aware, because this is not the kind of example we like to be, you know. So I think, you know, the process of autocratization is a worldwide process. I mean, it's happening even here. And, you know, what is going on in Mexico in many ways could be an example, a bad example of what to do in order to, you know, to reinforce these autocratization tendencies. Morena and the caudillismo. Well, it's very simple. I mean, it's the difference between the personalization of politics as a democratic problem, or the politics run it through institutions, and that is what is happening here in Morena. I mean, Morena is a movement with several caudillos, with several leaders, and that's a problem also for Morena, but that's a problem for the country, because at the end of the day, you know, the integration process, the political integration process, goes through persons and not institutions, go through persons and not political programs. And that's an erosion at the end of the day of the democracy. Cartel Jalisco, that's a great question. Just in the federal issue, what we the electoral system in 2014 was transformed. As a federal country, we had, at the time, federal institutions that run federal elections, and local institutions, state institutions that run local elections. In 2014, they create, with the last electoral reform, a national electoral system in which the federal elections become a sort of rector institutions that oversights and coordinates the efforts of the local institutions, electoral institutions, in the local elections. So the national institutions run federal elections, but also oversees how and determines criteria and procedures, the same homologous, homogenized procedures for local elections. So it's a whole system. But yes, there are local elections, federal elections with several responsibilities. Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, that's a huge problem. I mean, I'm quite sure that the change of policy and on how to face organized crime of this administration, regarding what, you know, the policy of hugs and not bullets of the López Obrador administration, was forced by the U.S. administration pressures. I mean, this is not necessarily an autonomous decision of President Sheinbaum. This is a decision made in order to satisfy the pressures and the necessities that Trump's administration put on the table. The problem is that the 6 years of hugs and not bullets make much more worse the problem, increases the problem, because that was a period in which cartels could expand themselves, could arm themselves, could enrich themselves, and get stronger, you know. And right now, the change of policy, the return of assume that the fighting cartels is a problem of public security. I mean, it's a problem that you can face not only but mainly with, you know, the force of the state, you know, police operations, army operations, and so on, was forced by the pressure of the Trump's administration. That could satisfy Trump's necessities and claimings. I don't know. I mean, after the operation that killed the Mencho, that ended with the killing of Mencho, I mean, President Trump is still saying it's not enough. I think it's a very hard problem for Claudia Sheinbaum's administration to accept a force operation, a U.S. force operation, a military operation on Mexican soil. That's, I would say, impossible. It's much probable that it's eventually happened. The President Sheinbaum says, "Oh, it was a coordinated operation," and so on. I think the cooperation it changed a lot in the last couple of years, but there will be a huge political problem for Claudia Sheinbaum. And this national mentality that it's very strong in Mexico. No, this nationalism that couldn't accept any foreign intervention, even if it's very specific and against cartels. My problem is that in Mexico, I think the war against cartels has not been assumed yet as a very complex problem. It's not just a security problem that you can face with police operations. It's also a social problem. It's a political problem. I mean, the links between elections and organized crime are more and more clearer. It's an economic, of course, and financial problem. No, and you must fight it, with a very diverse and multifaceted, way to face it. And I think 2 minutes. The opposition, yeah. Well, the opposition is it's a shame. I mean, it's incredible. Usually, in a democratic country, when you lose an election, and you're the head of a party, you ask you ask for sorry, and you step back. You're right. In Mexico, no. In Mexico, the same responsibles of the leaders of the parties that were brutally defeated on elections, they are still on charge, and they perpetuate themselves. So opposition has a very lack of trustability, and that's a problem. And that's a huge thing for Morena's power ambitions, of course. But I would say, I mean, right now there is a 45% of the country, of the voters, that will not vote anyway for Morena. I mean, that's one of the consequences of dividing society, between the people and the enemies of the people, such as the public discourse usually claims, and how the opposition can step out of this lack of trustability. I don't know. Maybe we have to wait. I mean, it already happened on last year's elections. Besides the judicial elections, there were local elections in Veracruz and Tamaulipas, and Morena lost a lot of prior victories. I mean, Morena shows that it's not an unbeatable party. So it depends a lot of the raising, eventually, of local leaderships that could, be attractive for the opposition voters, the anti-Morena voters. Those leaderships could not be arose. But for instance, nobody knows about this major in Michoacán, in Uruapan, the one who was killed, but that's an example of how local, even municipal leaderships can be, the way to attract this anti-Morena votation. So nothing is written. Of course, if we lost the possibility to have free and fair elections, everything will be lost, no matter what opposition or eventual opposition leaderships does or happens or not. But I mean, there is a story to be written still, no?
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. We'll keep this conversation going, and when we have a plan B, hopefully you'll come and explain to us what does it mean, why there will not be another plan C, and exactly what will be the implications for the Mexican democracy. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.